You know that Keeley Companies is all about fostering the world-class culture through their incredible cultural pillars. Well, it was time to add a seventh cultural pillar, Keeley Green. Guided by the mission to raise the sustainability standards by which they design, build, operate, and live, Keeley Green is dedicated to using a holistic approach to leave a positive impact on our environment, create a future that is sustainable for generations to come. In the words of Rusty Keeley, we are just getting started. You can learn more about that just getting started mentality and all the work they do by visiting my friends at Keeley Companies online at keeleycompanies.com.
Welcome to the Live Inspired podcast with John O'Leary. John is the #1 national best-selling author of the book On Fire. He's a world-class inspirational speaker, and he's the host of the Live Inspired podcast. John interviews extraordinary individuals on their life story so that you can wake up from accidental living and more fully live your life story. Here's your host, John O'Leary.
Hello, my friends, and welcome to the Live Inspired podcast with John O'Leary. Today's guest has a remarkable life story. Sister Monica Clare, she's a nun. She's an author. She is the superior at the community of St. John Baptist. It's an Episcopal convent in New Jersey. She serves as a spiritual counselor. She guides others through healing, challenges with mental illness, and addiction. Today, Sister Monica shares what it was like to grow up in chaos, endure a painful marriage, and journey from comedy clubs and ad agencies to the quiet rhythms of convent living. With honesty and with heart, she opens up about her faith, imposter syndrome, resilience, and how even a moment in Walmart can become holy ground when you're listening to God's voice. Her journey is packed with pain, with humor, and with sacred surprises. My friend, if you have ever felt stuck, and I have, ever felt behind, I have, ever felt unworthy of a fresh start, that's me, well, this conversation is for us. You and I are going to walk out of this reminded that healing is possible, calling can come later in life, and there is beauty in new beginnings. So my friends, let me loop her into the podcast with you. She is my friend. She's about to be yours. Her name is Sister Monica Clare.
Sister Monica Clare, welcome to Live Inspired with John O'Leary.
Thank you so much for having me.
Well, I feel as if I'm on with a friend already. For those, though, who don't know you quite as well as I do, they haven't read your book, they haven't checked out all your podcasts and feel like they know your life.
Mhm.
If you were to introduce yourself to them, what would you say?
I would say I'm Sister Monica Clare, and I'm very privileged to be the Mother Superior of an Episcopal community of nuns in New Jersey. And at the beginning of my life, you never, ever could have predicted that this is where I would end up.
Well, that will either have people running for the exit of the grocery store or pulling their cart up even closer saying, Sister, tell me more. And so I'm not afraid.
Good.
I want to hear more about that childhood and about what led you to this place in New Jersey. A little bit of my backstory. If I happen to describe my childhood in one word, it would be blessed. And I would go on from there, and it would bore you after a while of how blessed little John O'Leary's life was as a kid, in spite of the fire and everything else. It was blessed. If you had to describe your childhood in one word, what would it be?
Chaos. That's what my childhood was. A lot of instability.
Let's begin by talking about Clyde. Who is Clyde?
Clyde was unfortunately my father, and he had serious mental health issues that he never got help for. And so he was a drug addict, alcoholic, he was an abuser, he was quite unpredictable, very violent, and he was also a cop. So that mixture made him a very, very scary person. And he abused my mother, he abused me and my sisters. And it was always our fault because we weren't acting right and we couldn't behave. Meanwhile, he was spending the family, any salary that he got, he would spend it on drugs and alcohol and girlfriends and all that. So we were hungry a lot when I was a kid. They finally, my mom split up from my dad when I was 13, and life started to get better. Thanks be to God.
Talk about your mom. Before
Mhm.
she separated from Clyde, what was life like with you and mom and the other sisters?
My mom had been really born into a system of Southern womanhood where she was told by her parents that there was no use in sending her to college because she was a female, and that all they wanted from her was to leave home as soon as she could when she was a teenager and get married and have kids. She said even around the age of 15 or 16, her parents, who were very sweet, lovely people, they were just sort of asking her what her plans were and if she was planning on getting married. So she got married when she was 16 years old. And I always think that the year that she and my father got married, she was 16, he was 17. I felt like their development stopped there because they were very teenage in their outlook on life, in their really unpredictable emotional lives and drama. And it just seemed like very adolescent to me. Of course, that was after I grew up and looked back on it. My mother was, and is, she's still alive, incredibly brilliant.
Yeah.
She went to carpentry school and learned, after she split from my dad, learned how to be a carpenter, and she built a 3-level deck with a hot tub off the back of her house. She's absolutely brilliant, but she was never allowed to pursue any of her potential, which was such a tragedy. She was constantly trying to keep my father happy because that's what Southern women did in the 60s. You obeyed your man.
You wrote about it, and before you and I recorded, one thing you and I discussed was as difficult as it was to read what you shared,
Mhm.
what we both know to be true is that's just the tip of the iceberg. When you
Thanks.
were little and during this and witnessing this taking place in your family, what kept you going?
Definitely my faith. I don't ever remember not knowing that God was with me and taking care of me and that it all was going to make sense someday. And this is what I got from my grandmother, Zelda, who was, I think she was a saint. She had very deep faith and she looked at everything through that lens of, okay, what is God trying to teach us? And there's a reason for all of this. Some people really get angry when people say everything happens for a reason, but
Right.
that's one of the things that really got me through. And reading the Bible and seeing how people's lives were so tough, and then they kept walking with God. Job was always a big inspiration for me. I always tell people, if you want to know about theodicy and how our loving God can allow suffering, read Job, which is, it's prose. It wasn't a true story or anything, but it's a good illustration of what suffering means. And even as a kid, I always held on to this belief that the bad times are not going to last forever, that things will get better someday.
You and I were watching the same kind of television. You were watching it about a decade before I was, but you and I were partying on the same channels. The Nun story and The Sound of Music.
Yes.
What
Yeah.
for our audience, most will know The Sound of Music, I would imagine. What
Hmm.
was it about those two films that you enjoyed so much?
I think because I was living in chaos, anything that was beautiful and orderly made a lot of sense to me. And I was drawn to it because I thought, well, my mother is married and has kids, and she's absolutely miserable all the time. These ladies are nuns, and they seem to be having a very fulfilling life. They could get an education, travel the world, et cetera, et cetera. Of course, I got mad at the end of Sound of Music because she did the 1950s thing. She left to get married. And the nun story, too, she leaves the order at the end because that's probably what Hollywood audiences prefer to see is, but I was thinking, oh no, that was the happy ending, being in the convent.
Well, our Hollywood audience today is going to hear a very different story. It's going to be the opposite of
Yes.
those two films as we get farther along the journey.
Hmm.
I grew up being educated by nuns.
Oh, how nice.
In grade school and middle school, probably had 5 different nuns who taught me. When I was in the hospital, it was called St. John's Mercy.
Wow.
Almost every chaplain that we had roll through was a nun. Several of the nurses were nuns. So I had nuns everywhere around me. You grew up in the South, there were far
Hmm.
fewer nuns that you were familiar with personally.
Yeah.
So I still find it strange that, yeah, I get that you like the sense of order, but what was it
Mhm.
about the habit and
Yeah.
that sisterhood that you thought
Hmm.
you liked?
I think it was for me a family. Like I really thought of going through life as part of an organization or a team looked more secure than getting married and having kids, because it wasn't just my mom who was suffering through marriage and kids. It was pretty much everybody around me was uh, pretty miserable. And I watched this Hollywood depiction of the convent, and it was sort of depicted, it was too hard and oppressive or whatever. But to me, I was thinking, that's a very well-oiled organization. There, there's discipline, there's sameness. I was really drawn to that feeling of they are following God, they're doing the right thing, you know.
There's a story you shared that
Mhm,
kind of broke my heart. You're an adolescent, maybe 16 or so,
mhm,
maybe 17. You go to your little
mhm.
buddy's house. You go over with a girlfriend to go swimming.
Yeah,
And then mom comes home. Not your mom,
yeah,
your male friend's
mm,
mom. You guys weren't doing anything crazy, but would you just
yeah,
share that story? Because I think
yeah.
it paints a picture of how the world saw you and probably how you saw yourself.
Yeah, and thank you for having empathy for that little kid that I was. You know, I was
Breaks me. Yeah.
thank you. I was a teenager at the time, and I was just starting to get a little bit of self-confidence because my dad had been gone for a couple of years, and I was feeling a little safer in the world. And my friend Allison, she was one of my best friends. She lived in the projects, and because she and I were so poor, we didn't get invited to slumber parties and birthday parties at the nice families' homes. We hung out with kids in the projects, kids who lived in apartments, whatever. That's whose mothers invited us over. And so when my family, my mother and my stepfather bought a house, which is the first time I'd lived in a house, you know, and when we got into that house, we were in a sort of nicer neighborhood, but we were across a cemetery from a really nice neighborhood with big houses. And that's where my friend Billy lived. And we would walk across the cemetery, and his parents were very strict. They didn't allow him to have friends over when they were gone. And so we would go over there and go swimming. One time his parents came home too early, and Allison and I were just like jumping out of the pool, getting ready to flee because we were going to get in trouble. And his parents took him inside, and I heard his mother say, "You get those white trash girls out of my house right now." And that just about floored me because being poor carries a lot of shame,
Yeah.
and being regarded as trash, especially in the South, is just, I felt like that was a permanent brand on my forehead that she's trash. I heard the word trash quite a bit, and his mother saying that just really brought so much shame.
So how do you not believe it? I'm always amazed when people break the cycle of violence or the cycle
Yeah,
of poverty.
yeah.
Like when you are told that you're white trash by your
Mhm.
neighbors, when your dad abuses you and treats you as if you are trash,
Yeah.
your mother in many cases acts as if we collectively are trash, and when all your neighbors
Mhm.
act like that as well.
Yeah.
I mean, really, like, because that's
Yeah.
what you saw. That's your world.
It's my world.
What allows this little girl who leaves with her hair still wet from the pool,
Yeah.
recognizing that maybe there's more for her out there?
I think it was a combination. I had an aunt, my mother's oldest sister, who left the South, went to Chicago, went to the Art Institute, and became a commercial artist, very successful. And I had that example in my mind always of this is a woman who didn't listen to her parents when they said, don't go to school past high school. She did it anyway. And her life was more prosperous. She was exposed to culture and sophistication. And she had come from nothing in Alabama. And then she's living in Chicago in a very nice two-story house, which I thought millionaires lived in two-story houses. Wow. And I think she was in Oak Park, which was a very nice neighborhood. And so I had that example. And also my mother had, when she first married my dad, they lived in Paris, believe it or not, Paris, France, because there was a garrison, an army garrison there. My dad was in the army at the time. So
Yes.
my mother was exposed to much more than just Alabama and Georgia. And she would always tell us the only way you're ever going to be happy is if you get a college education, you get out of this horrible little town.
Yeah.
She really drilled that into our heads. And that was one of her deal breakers. We had to go to college because she was never allowed to.
Well, your mother remarried,
Yeah.
and I love the story of your, I think, is a drill sergeant, your
Yes.
stepfather. I mean, I thought that story was going to go south, and I'm glad it did not. But
Oh,
the drill sergeant and his wife, your mom, come running out to you, and you think you're in trouble for being
yeah.
partying too hard or a million other
Yeah.
things, but instead they're celebrating the fact that what happened.
That I had been attending college classes when I was a senior in high school, and then they accepted me as a freshman at the end of my senior year in high school. And I just couldn't believe it. But my parents came running out, and I was thinking they're coming out to yell at me because I kept the car out too long. And they're waving an envelope saying, "You got a free ride, you got a free ride scholarship." That was great.
So I think it's so cool they celebrated that elevation.
Good.
Some people kind of push it away, and not
Mhm.
only that, but when you had an opportunity of going to New York, they had a million reasons to say no.
They did, yeah. My mother, she's always been very good about not shooting down our dreams. She was an unusual mom in the fact that she wanted her kids to go into the arts because she probably could have been a successful artist or an architect or an engineer or
Right.
something. And she knew that her sister had done that and it was very successful. So she really wanted us to go into some kind of creative field. And it was pretty funny. I ended up in advertising. She was always very excited about that. And my older sister studied dance for years and years. She could have gone into a company. And now Autumn is a scientist. She's,
Wow.
yeah, she's an environmental safety expert.
Well, since you're talking about professions, we might as well go down this path.
Yeah,
You had some unusual jobs in your life.
yes.
I'm not going to ask you about all of them, but I'm going to ask you, what did these jobs teach you that prepared you for the next step in life? All
I
right.
really, when I was in it, I couldn't see it because I thought I'm just going to make money. I do not care about advertising. But the first thing I said to the sisters when I first visited this convent was, "You ladies really need to advertise." And then I thought, if I ever get to be a nun, I'm really going to get out there with my marketing experience and my creativity. I can do photography. I design the website and have all these social media channels, advertising, because I thought when I first started really pursuing being a sister, I thought, this is a product I can really get behind. It's something I really believe in, not just movies and TV shows that I couldn't care less about.
So before you were in advertising in New York and then in LA, you
Mhm.
were in radio, I think in Rome,
Yeah,
Georgia, WKCX.
yeah, yeah.
What did that teach you to prepare you for your eventual role that you have today?
Well, it was so bizarre because when the subject of doing the audiobook came up, they said, "Would you like to have an actor do it? Or we know you've worked in radio, so would you like to do it?" And I said, "Yeah." And it was a wonderful throwback to my days in radio. I was so struck by, here's a microphone and I've got headphones on. I know what I'm doing,
Yes.
like riding a bike. And I really, when I was working in radio, I didn't realize how many skills I was assembling because I had to go out and meet politicians. I had to meet people who were, I thought, much higher status than me. I had to learn how to be a grown up because I was a teenager when I started. I was like 19 or 20. So I was just a kid, but I was learning how to be a journalist at that age. The writing that I did then has really served me well in copywriting, advertising. And I had thought about going into the news business when I was younger because it was one of my plan Bs if I couldn't be a nun. And after working in radio, I was cured of that because the hours are horrible. You have to get up before the sun comes
Yes.
up. You have to run around all day. I mean, I said, no, no, I'm not strong enough.
So it prepared you undoubtedly.
Yeah.
You eventually leave the South, leave New York,
Mhm.
head out west, and one of your first jobs out there for a year or two is you're a nanny.
Yeah.
Tell me
Yeah.
how being a nanny for a couple of years prepared you for what you're doing right now.
I think everybody should be forced to be a nanny at some point in their life because it teaches you so much about management and how to deal with people and how to not control people, but instead work with them. Because with kids, they can detect if you're wavering even just a tiny bit on
Yes.
something. They can, you have kids, and and so you learn to be a good manager by committing to what you're saying and to be a strong leader because that's also what they look for. And while I was doing nannying, I just thought, well, this is just to make money because I raised my little sister, so I have this marketable skill. And I had always babysat for money ever since I was like 10 or 11 years old, which is horrifying to think that parents would leave their kids with a child. But it was a skill that to this day in the convent, sisters will have conflicts. I mean, we're a bunch of women living together, so of course there are going to be arguments and conflicts. And I use the same tools that I use with those kids.
Well, I'm curious. I'm sure you use some of the tools you learn as a stand-up comedian. So
Yeah.
how did becoming a stand-up comedian serve you effectively in the role you currently have?
I think just to look at things through a humorous lens really helps. Helps to ease the tension sometimes, and because the work that we do as sisters, if we were just serious and holy all the time, we would be drained down to nothing. So I think that bringing a little humor in, the sisters did not quite get my sense of humor when I first came.
That's awesome.
Yeah, but now they'll give me some laughs, and I really appreciate that. And also just public speaking. For some bizarre reason, I have only one friend who's exactly like me on this. I can talk in front of 1,000 people. I can get up and do stand up. I can sing in front of thousands of people. But if you put me at a cocktail party, I will break out in hives. And I can't handle socializing, but I can be in front of people. It never has scared me.
So out of all those roles, I think people can imagine how they have a dotted line toward
Mhm.
becoming a nun. It's the
Yeah.
next role that I think will surprise them the most. How
Mhm.
did being a wife prepare you for the convent?
Excellent question. It helped me because, first of all, being married to a very vehement atheist suddenly made me realize how important my faith actually was to me, because I usually hid it from people. And I hid it from him in a way, like he knew that I had faith and all that, but he would make fun of it. And it made me dig in my heels and say, this is really important to me. I never realized how mad I would get if somebody was denigrating my faith. And being married also helped because we went into couples counseling, and I learned so much about conflict resolution and couples counseling. And now I think everybody should be in couples counseling,
Right.
because every relationship we have to work on it and try to make it better. Family, friends, coworkers, everything. If only we could learn how to be better at relationships, things would be much better.
We occasionally hear on this podcast about people who are in loveless marriages. Very rarely do we hear about couples who stepped into their marriage almost like in a loveless courtship that became a
Totally.
loveless marriage that ended a couple years
Yeah.
afterwards.
Yeah.
So I'm just curious, sister, why
Mhm.
you're so
Mhm.
experienced, you've been around, you've seen life.
Thank you.
Why say yes when you knew it was wrong?
I think because, in spite of the fact that I'm pretty countercultural, I just gave in to the cultural pressure, because there was always this big question mark over my head. Why doesn't she have a boyfriend? Why doesn't she date? And there was always speculation among family and friends. People were always giving me makeovers and saying, giving me advice on how to get a boyfriend. And that social stigma of being single really got to me as I was about to turn 30. So I thought, well, I can check this off. It's a societal virtue. If you're married and you have children, you're seen as a little bit higher status than other people. And people will get off my back. They'll stop asking me about this. And also, I hadn't really had a boyfriend before, so I didn't know what it was supposed to be. I'd only heard people griping about their partners. So I thought, well, he's a guy. He doesn't want to talk about mushy stuff and love. He's a guy. And he doesn't want to hear anything I have to say because he's a guy. And then I looked around at my male friends and their partners, and I started to notice that other males were not like that. And that's when I started getting this inkling that he was really keeping me at arm's length.
Through the courtship, onto the altar, and beyond into your marriage, how ultimately did that marriage fall apart?
There was always a nagging doubt in the back of my mind. And we both knew that we had entered into the marriage reluctantly based on the pressure from our family and friends. So I think both of us had one foot in and one foot out the whole time, but I couldn't put my finger on it. And then I was a copywriter at the time. I was doing freelance copywriting. Paramount had hired me to write the website for the Truman Show.
Okay.
And it was a big, big deal. And I had this old computer that, of course, melted down just as I was about to send my copy in. There was a deadline looming. So I called Chris. He was at his friend's party, and I said, "Can I use your computer, your email?" And he said, "Yeah." And I opened up his computer and opened up the email, and all these emails from different women started coming into the inbox. And it was unbelievable how many of them there were. And through clicking through some of those emails, I found that he had been having a serious affair with a woman named Lauren. And then he was meeting up with all these other people just for like casual flings. And there was chat rooms and things like that that were disturbing to me. And I thought, wow, I always suspected something was going on, but he is such a nerd and he has no game whatsoever. There's no way he would cheat on me. He was like this totally disheveled professor kind of personality. And so it was shocking too, because I had suspected it, but didn't have any proof. So I called him and he came home and he said, I know what you found and we need to talk about it. And that was the beginning of the end. And God was plucking me out of that.
And he never really said, I'm sorry.
No, he didn't.
And
No.
and he never really said the words, even if you whisper them and don't really mean them or say them tongue in cheek, he never really said the words, I love you.
No, he never did. It was like he would only give me so much. And I knew enough about human nature to know that people who are guarded are keeping a lot of secrets that they don't want to share. So I always thought, what's the big secret that he's not sharing with me? And it was that he had this life where he was, basically addicted to these casual encounters with women. At the time, I learned a lot about that kind of behavior, that it wasn't really about sex. It was about anxiety, about managing anxiety. People who are very anxious use sex sometimes as a very unhealthy coping mechanism instead of going to therapy. So I had compassion for him in that way, but
Wow.
you can feel a lot of ways about something at the same time, conflicting emotions. I felt relief in a weird way. I was, of course, devastated and knocked to the floor, but I also felt a little bit of relief because I knew what was going on finally.
When tragedy strikes, when relationships end, when something you loved fades,
Mm-hmm.
it's easy to recognize that there is no God.
Mm-hmm. A lot of people walk away at that point.
And it's super understandable. In your case, it led to an even greater spiritual awakening.
It did. I mean, one of the things that I learned in Pleasant Valley South Baptist Church when I was a child is that suffering sometimes brings us closer to God. And had I not endured what I did, I wouldn't have seen God's plan so clearly. That whole incident with my ex-husband got me into therapy for the first time in my life. It taught me that everything wasn't my fault. And getting into Al-Anon for family and friends of addicts and alcoholics, I started going to that thinking I was a fraud, that I didn't really qualify. And I was like, oh my goodness, do I qualify for this group?
Right. I'll lead this service, guys. I got this one.
Exactly. I've got a PhD in this. So it was sort of like a phoenix thing where I just arose out of the ashes and I knew God was with me, rebuilding my life better,
Let's talk about that. So it's one thing to have your life slowly rebuilt. It's one thing to imagine there's a better path for me than the one I've been on.
Yeah.
It's a totally another wild step to say. And I think that might be a religious order.
Yes. I think once I started learning about my true nature in therapy and Al-Anon, the term authentic self kept being sort of bandied about, and I had never heard that term. And I started reading about, I read a book called Party of One. It was written by an introvert for introverts. This was before introversion was acceptable. Introversion was something to be cured, and you had to become an extrovert to function in the world. And I thought, well, that's part of my nature. I'm an introvert. It explains so much. And my career that I was in was exactly the opposite of where an introvert needs to be. And I started looking at this call that I had felt all my life to be a sister. And I was thinking, it's a spiritual call, but I think it's also an emotional call to something that fits my personality better. I probably should have been a librarian or a nun. Because that's my personality. And I started taking personality tests, the Myers-Briggs, and nuns and monks are really big on Enneagrams. So I took that and learned a lot about myself. I started looking at my nature as something to embrace and to live into instead of something to be cured, because I was always trying to cure my introversion.
Talk about the community of
hmm
St. John Baptist.
hmm
What it first geographically, what is it like? And then talk about some of the ladies that you got to meet when you first joined.
Well, we are a community that was founded in England in 1852. And then our sisters founded an American branch in New York City in 1874. So our order has always had close ties with the Diocese of New York, the clergy there. It's been a long, happy relationship. And then in 1915, the sisters decided to move the convent, the mother house, to Mendham, New Jersey, which is, back then there was a lot of talk about fresh air work and nature and exercise. And the sisters really embraced that, because before that they had lived on the Lower East Side, which was very polluted, and there was a lot of disease and crime. One of our sisters got shot 5 times right in front of the convent. I think it was in the 1890s. And true to form, she got better. They removed all the bullets except one, and she went on to become the Mother Superior. So
Gosh.
that is the nature of our community. It's a bunch of very tough, very hard-headed women. And that tradition has been handed down all these years.
So most people, when they hear that, hard-headed, tough women would
hmm
now run for the exit and say, I have nothing that I want to do with this group of hard-headed women. You you worked to get in for
I did.
years and years and years. What
Yeah.
was it about these women and their lifestyle and their faith that
hmm
you were attracted to?
I think it was the fact that I kept visiting them, and every time I visited them, they were still together. That really impressed me. That I knew that they had conflicts and they all were control freaks, just like me. But this was not my first choice. I actually was trying to join the Sisterhood of St. Margaret in Boston. They were in Boston at the time. Now they're in Duxbury. And nobody returned my call. Nobody emailed me back. I thought, wow, they must really hate me. So this is my second choice. And I was drawn to this community because I never knew that New Jersey was so beautiful. I thought it was all factories and just toxic waste. But this is a beautiful part of New Jersey. It's in the mountains. It used to be a farming community. So I really love the beauty of this place. And people talk about that all the time, how our grounds and our buildings are so beautiful. The proximity to New York City was very appealing to me because I had always had this tug on my heart to do some kind of ministry in New York City. And the sisters themselves, at first I was like, oh dear, they're all so harsh. But that gave me the permission to be more honest and less codependent and being super nice and expecting people to read my mind. It's really taught me this sort of Jersey, New York thing of just say what you mean, come out and say it. That has benefited me more than just about anything in my life, because now I can speak up for myself.
You were 46 when you entered, is that right?
That's correct. Yeah.
And a little bit older than that when you made your final vows?
Yes. I and now that I'm 59, I'm looking back saying I'm not that old, but
Right, a young woman.
yeah, young.
What was the biggest challenge leaving the secular world and entering into this new community?
It's very difficult. One of the reasons that a lot of communities don't take older vocations like I was is because we tend to be more set in our ways as we age. And when I came in, I didn't realize how set in my ways I was. I had lived by myself for 20 years. I was used to my own form of housekeeping and how to correctly do things.
Yes.
And living with a bunch of other people whose mothers raised them very differently than mine did. I joke around and say 2 of them don't even believe in germs. But having to put up with their stuff and them having to put up with my stuff was a real adjustment. Just like when you first get married and you're like, wow, I didn't know you did that. So it was different knowing them as a visitor and then living with them, because it's this sort of really bizarre combination of we're coworkers, but we're also family. And we're also an organization, so it's tough.
I'm sure there were days, and maybe there still are occasional days, where you went to bed thinking, have I made the biggest mistake of my life?
Yeah.
So when you had those days, what kept you in it? And ultimately, what freed you from wondering if you made this mistake? Because now you know it's not easy, but it's the right decision.
Yeah, my decision to be a sister, I've never wavered on that. To follow God's call has always felt like the right thing. but I didn't know if this was the right community for me. And so there were many doubts the first couple of years, actually. I was like, should I call St. Margaret's again? I was getting to know sisters in other communities, and all of them would kind of say, if it doesn't work out there, we'll take you, like under the radar. So I knew that I could try another community. I had seen brothers and sisters do that, and it was very successful. So that was the main dilemma that I had. Is this the place for me? And there was just this one day when I was walking around Walmart, I call it the Walmart revelation, and God spoke to me in my soul and said, stay. This is where you need to be. And
Do you think God speaks to you?
yes,
Tell me and
yeah,
us more about that, because I think some people think, well, if they do
mhm,
believe in God, they think the God of the Bible, and
yes,
he hasn't really said much in 2,000 years. But
yes,
in learning about you, I think you feel
mhm,
like God speaks to you all the time, and I
yeah,
think a lot of people who are rooted in their faith feel that way. So talk about how
yeah.
God speaks to you.
I think before I entered the convent, God never spoke to me. I was always just a monologue, asking God for guidance, constantly asking God for guidance, and then only seeing it in hindsight. And then when I came here and really started working on my prayer life, because I thought my prayer life was fine, and the sisters were always nagging me, how's your prayer life? What are you doing? And they gave me all these books about prayer. I was like, I've been praying all my life. What's the big deal? But once I learned all these different forms of prayer, I'll never forget it. I was walking down the stairs going to the refectory for a meal, and words came into my soul. It wasn't like I heard words, but words appeared in my soul and talked to me and said, very reassuring words of you're doing just fine. Don't let them get you down. And that one day in Walmart, the words appeared in my soul. You don't have to leave. You can stay. It's happened quite a few times since then. Never heard God before I became a sister. Never.
What's something that you sisters do that you think the rest of us might benefit from doing more of in our lives?
Definitely making your faith into a regular practice. A lot of people, they get the kids dressed, they run to church on Sunday and they go home. And they don't think about God or church until they go back to church. And when you make it a regular part of your life, because they call our life the regular life sometimes, and it's because we make a concerted effort to be in the chapel 6 times a day. I don't expect secular folks to do that, but but we pray together 6 times a day. Plus we have 2 hours of private prayer time. And it made me think about with your loved ones, how you connect with them at regular intervals through the day. Like
Right.
you're probably texting your wife saying, I'm on the way home or whatever. And that kind of connection, those little points of contact every day to help your relationship to stay stable and keep that connection going. And one of the sisters, I think I wrote about in the book, I was getting angry because I couldn't get any work done because we're always in chapel. My sister said, that's our number one job. Praying, that's your number one job. And you have to imagine Jesus is in that chapel waiting for you. And he'll be very sad if you don't come. Wow, that really got me to go to chapel.
When you feel spiritually dead or
Hmm.
dry or distant,
Hmm.
I'm sure these are emotions you felt.
Oh, yeah.
What
Yeah.
what do you do? And for those of us having this conversation with you, including the guy asking the question, when it just feels like there's a distance or
Yeah.
dryness, what do you do to reawaken, reignite your faith?
One thing that I've really learned to do, I think God taught me this because I would have come up with anything this smart on my own. I asked God how to pray about it. Teach me to pray about this. I don't know what to ask for. I don't know what to do. Just teach me how to pray about this. And that's where a lot of new methods of connecting with God have come about that I never would have thought of. So I know that God is teaching me how to pray. And also, when I'm in the middle of something really, really hard, I have to remind myself to ask for God's help.
Mm.
Sometimes I forget. And there was a story when I was a little kid, our preacher told us a story about some lady in the church there who had passed away. And he said, one time she had on a pretty new dress and she came to church and I said, I love your dress. And she said, yeah, but I got to return it because I forgot to ask God about it before I bought it. And that always reminds me, come back to God, come back to, because in a lot of situations we get so stressed out and distracted by some big thing that's going on in our life, we forget to ask for help or
Yeah.
to bring our anger, to bring our confusion to God. God doesn't mind.
You're the second sister I've had on our podcast. The first one is referred to affectionately as the Iron Nun.
I
She
love that.
started running. She had never even walked before, like never owned a pair of tennis shoes. But in her late 60s, she started running, and she's still running in her late 80s. She
Incredible.
made this late pivot in life.
Hmm.
And in some regards, you've made a late pivot. So one of your quotes is this. I think it's a good time to take you through some of your own words. Tell me
Sure.
what you're telling me, please.
Okay.
It's never too late to become the person you were meant to be.
Hmm. Yeah, I've heard stories of people, Grandma Moses and people like that who really found their true calling when they were older. And I would hope that people who find their calling and pursue it at a inappropriately older age don't see that as a failure, just see it as, okay, this is exactly where I'm supposed to be at this time to pursue this. I think we beat ourselves up a lot about that timeline. I always call it the imaginary timeline. You're supposed to have figured it all out by the time you're 30. You're supposed to, be a millionaire and married and have kids. That's not for everybody. Everybody's on their own time.
So I'm going to roll you through some of the quotes that I wrote down that moved me. Here comes another one. My past did not disqualify me from becoming a nun. It prepared me.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, people ask me questions like, how can you be a nun if you're married? I'm like, I'm an Episcopalian. They're okay with that. And anything that I did in my past, in the old days, they didn't allow you to talk about your past at all when you came into the community. And some of them were really nervous about me writing about my life before I came here. But I tried to say, Thomas Merton did, St. Augustine did, that was their testimony, that was their real lives. So yeah, thank God it didn't disqualify me.
I mean, almost all the saints did. It's actually what made them ultimately saints is they had this past
Hmm.
that usually was relatively ugly, and then it was redeemed and they changed.
Yeah, look at Paul. Yeah.
There's holiness in humor.
Hmm.
Jesus laughed, so should we.
Yeah, amen. Amen. I would think that people wouldn't have been drawn to Jesus. They wouldn't have befriended him and followed him to the ends of the earth if he wasn't endearing, if he wasn't fun to be around. If he was just very serious and holy all the time, people would have been like, we get enough of that already from the Sanhedrin. But they loved him, and he referred a lot to friends. He had good relations with his family, and even though his mother was probably extremely nervous for him. So I think that he definitely had a sense of humor, and he was the incarnation of God. And God also has a very charming, funny personality, I think.
You write that you can serve God wearing a habit or a hoodie. The law
Yeah,
is the same.
that's right. We can serve God no matter where we are. One of the people that I have in spiritual direction is a TV producer, and he always has this guilt that his job is not godly. And I try to tell him, I think you do a lot of ministry as a TV producer because he's a man of faith and he presents this model of being a good Christian, being kind and supportive of other people. And that's a ministry. Like you could be a garbage man and have that same ministry. Every job has dignity. I think Martin Luther King said that.
Yeah, so there's a big old picture of Martin Luther King on my wall, and I love his passion for the dignity of work. I
Mm-hmm.
think people who don't really know his heart think it's always about race, and that's of course a
Yeah,
big part of MLK, but
yeah,
he celebrated work.
he did. Yeah. What a saint and a prophet.
Uh, One of your prophet quotes is
Mhm.
this: leaving behind everything was not a loss, it was freedom.
Yeah, yeah. That was the most surprising thing because I had spent 23 years of my life being terrified of getting fired. Even though I hated my job, I didn't want to not have my job because growing up the way I did, I didn't ever feel like I had a safety net at all. And so quitting my job and walking away from it, I thought would be terrifying. I would have regrets.
Yes.
And it was almost like walking away from a burning building. It was like I got out of something that made me very, very unhappy. And it was the same with my marriage, just walking away from it. I tell people, because I've been working as a hospital chaplain, and I tell people it's okay when you leave something or someone dies to feel both grief and relief.
Mm.
Those things commonly occur at the same time. So I had to grieve the loss of this career that had been so impressive to other people, but the relief overpowered all that.
Well, it ties, I think, brilliantly into the final quote I'll ask you about. Spiritual life, you say, is
Mhm.
not about escaping the world. It's about entering more deeply into it with love.
Amen. Amen to that. I try to tell people, because when I was growing up, people would say, oh, if you get too religious, you're going to lose touch with reality. And I would always say, I think church is reality. If it's a good church, it interacts with the world in a loving and compassionate way. And you can really make a difference if you follow God.
Mm. You wrote about in Los Angeles learning that your father wasn't in a hospital, that he was in prison. And for you, it was the final straw.
Mm-hmm.
He'd burnt down his new girlfriends on top of his new wives. He'd been married 5 or 6 times and had 50 other girlfriends in addition to that, and was abusive
Yes.
and horrible and
Yeah.
all these traits. And now you find out that he tried to burn down his new girlfriend's house, and
Yeah.
you were done. What was it like to write that letter to him?
I was so scared. I started writing that letter. It was sort of like a resignation letter. I resign from dealing with you. I started it a few times and couldn't find the right words. And then I prayed about it. And when I started writing on my yellow pad with my blue pen, God, I think, was with me because it came out very quickly. It was like 4 handwritten pages, very dense material. And because now I even look back because I remember it. I didn't keep a copy of it, but I remember it and I think that was pretty good. That particular piece right there. I know that came from God. I didn't say that. And then when I mailed it, I was literally afraid that when he got that letter, he would come to Los Angeles, show up at the door with a gun and blow me away. That's how scared I was of my father. And I think if I hadn't lived all the way across the country from him at the time, I wouldn't have been able to do that.
The core of the letter said what?
It basically said, I found out you lied about being in the hospital and you have been lying about a lot of other things. And I can't do this anymore. I'm not going to believe you. You're a liar. And all the awful stuff you put us through, you've never, I don't think I said made amends, but I said, you've never been sorry about it. And you're my father. You were supposed to protect me from violence and screaming and insanity and blood. And you didn't. You brought it into my life.
Mm.
So I can't have any communication with you anymore. I did say I would pray for him, which I did.
When you think of Clyde, or you're asked questions about him, or you even hear the word Clyde,
Yeah.
what emotions enter into your heart?
I used to really feel sorry for him because he was good at that, at making people feel sorry for him. And I would think, well, he probably had a horrible childhood, and that's why I would make excuses for him. And I only in therapy started thinking, what about me? How has his behavior affected me? I used to think he didn't have a choice because he had mental illness and addiction and all these things. And over the years, I've thought, yeah, he did have a choice. I had choices in spite of what I lived through, and I chose a different way. And maybe he was just selfish and horrible. And that was a hard realization for me. It made me cry when that realization hit me because I think I'd always protected myself by feeling sorry for him.
Sister, what would you say to someone who they're in that abusive relationship, they're in that broken friendship, they're in a place in their life where they are deep in a rut and they're just losing hope that the darkness is too mighty and the light's not going to return. So for those of us right now hearing this conversation about you and your wild life of ups
Yeah.
and downs and now peace,
Yeah.
what would you say to someone right now who does not feel that peace in their life?
No matter how dark it is, there's always hope. My father's crooked lawyer friend, Ron Patton, he was always getting himself out of horrible situations. And he told me when I was a kid, he told me and my mom, there's always something you can do to change the situation. Always something. You just haven't found it yet. And that got me through a lot of scrapes in my life, a lot of valleys of the shadow of death, thinking, okay, Ron told me there's always something you can do. And there is.
Sister, we ask all of our guests 7 questions that tether all of our conversations together as one big happy community. They're called the Live Inspired 7. So Get ready to rock and roll. Get your running shoes on. Here we go. The first question is, what's been the most impactful book you've ever read?
Seven Story Mountain by Thomas Merton.
For those who haven't read it, it's an awesome book. But what's the core concept within that book?
The concept is no matter who you are, God is with you and God has a plan for you. If you just talk to God, you'll figure it out with God.
What's one positive characteristic, one beautiful trait that you possessed as a little girl growing up in the South that you wish you exhibited as brilliantly today?
Oh, thank you. I wish I had been more open about my faith, about my experiences of God and talking about God. The only person I could talk to was my grandmother. And she was a little bit embarrassed. She felt like that was all a bit much. But I wish I had been more open about having faith.
If your current home, where you
Mhm.
live, where you reside, caught fire,
Mhm.
and you have an opportunity of running in and grabbing one thing from your sleeping quarters, what's the one thing you would grab?
Oh, this might make me cry. I grabbed my grandmother's Bible. It's the Bible that she had. Nothing else matters to me but that Bible. I wouldn't even grab my laptop first. It would be the Bible.
If you could sit on a bench on a gorgeous day and have a long conversation with anyone living or deceased, who would you like to be next to?
Definitely Jesus. Definitely. Also Paul, St. Paul. I would really like to talk to him about the way his life changed so drastically, what that was like.
Amen.
Amen.
What's the best advice Paul, Jesus, grandma, or anybody else ever gave you?
God is in it. God is with you.
What advice do you wish you had received at age 20?
Join the convent now.
Do not go to New York. Do not go to LA. Don't babysit those kids for 2 years. Do not say yes when he says, "Will you marry me?"
Exactly. Change the script. If I had more courage, I would have joined back then. But
Sister Monica Clare, it has been said that all great people can have their lives summed up in one sentence. How would you like yours to read?
God loves everybody.
Well, my friend who grew up in the South moved up to the Northeast, then out West, and has touched just about every other base along the way. Thank you for knowing that God loves you. And thank you for living that out loudly through your life so the rest of us might know it's true in our lives too.
Amen. Thank you for the same things.
My friends, this is a conversation with my friend, Sister Monica Clare. She's the author of the book, A Change of Habit. I read it on my last 3 flights and loved it. You would too. My name is John O'Leary, and today is your day. What a gift. Live inspired.
One of the most powerful takeaways from Sister Monica's journey is this: it's never too late to become who you were meant to be. Whether you are walking into a convent at 46 or finding faith after heartbreak, her life is proof that transformation doesn't follow a timeline. Someone else who reminded me of this truth was Sister Madonna Buter. Known around the world as the Iron Nun, she echoes some of that same message. She began running, my friends, at 48. That's the first time she ever put on a pair of tennis shoes, 48. She has since completed more than 45 Ironman races and reminds us all, don't think of your age, just keep moving. If you think that you are too old or that it's too late or you are too inexperienced or it's just too far gone to chase that dream or answering that calling, this conversation with Sister is right on time for you. You can check it out during episode 79, way back there in the past, or by cruising over with me right now to the Live Inspired podcast main channel at johnolearyinspires.com/podcast. In the show notes, we'll have a link to Sister Buter's podcast as well. Family, friends, leaders, servants, I want to thank you for tuning in to our podcast. So for this time and until next time, my name is John O'Leary. Today is our day. What a gift. Live inspired.
Keeley Companies was started almost 50 years ago by the one and only Larry Keeley. What started as a small family-owned paving company in St. Louis has grown to a nationally known full-service construction, development, and restoration partner. Larry the Legend, as he is affectionately known, has been a part of this growth every step of the way and continues to provide guidance as his son Rusty, my buddy, drives their vision and achieves results on purpose. His unwavering foundation of a family culture with a focus on people has gotten Keeley Companies to where they are today, and their journey is truly just beginning. To learn more about Larry the Legend and Keeley Companies, check them out at KeeleyCompanies.com.